There is a particular kind of cold that has nothing to do with weather, and I learned its name the winter I was 26 years old, the winter I walked into a dry goods store in Holmes County and bought a coat without asking my husband's permission, because that is the true answer to the question so many of you have asked me since I started this channel. Yes, a coat is what ended my marriage. Not because a man cannot forgive fabric and thread, but because in the world I came from, a woman who chooses something for herself has committed the one sin that cannot be undone with an apology. Once the silence started in my house, it never fully stopped. Not that winter, not the winter after, not until the morning I finally walked down our lane for the last time. But I am ahead of myself, so let me take you back to the kitchen window where it began, where I stood watching the wind strip the last leaves off the maple by the woodshed, thinking about the plain navy coat hanging in the window of the shop in town, the kind no bishop could object to on paper, no buttons, no color that would turn a head at preaching, nothing worldly about it at all except for the fact that I had chosen it, that I had saved for it myself. Egg money folded into a coffee tin behind the canning jars for nearly 2 years. Because my own coat had a torn seam I had mended so many times the thread had started to show through like a scar, and the lining had given out somewhere in the middle of the previous winter, and I was tired, in a way I did not yet have words for, of being cold inside my own home in every sense of that word. I did not tell my husband I was going. I walked to town with my sister-in-law on an ordinary Thursday, and I handed over every dollar in that tin, and I carried the coat home wrapped in brown paper like something I had to smuggle, and I hung it on the peg by the back door, and that peg became, without my understanding it yet, the place where my marriage started to end. I will not use my name in this story yet. You will come to know me as this channel goes on. But I will tell you I grew up old order in a farmhouse 2 generations old, married at 19 to a steady, quiet man with rough hands and a gentle laugh, a boy really, raised the same as I was, taught the same lessons about who leads and who follows, and for 5 years I told myself the silence between what I wanted and what I was allowed to want was simply what marriage meant. My husband came in from the barn that first evening, hung his hat above the new coat, looked at it for a long moment, said nothing, ate the supper I set in front of him, prayed over it, and went to bed. He did not speak to me again for 4 days. If you have never lived inside a house where silence is the punishment, you may think that sounds like nothing, like at least he never raised a hand. And you would be right that he never did, because that was never our way. But what a closed community does instead is quieter and, I have come to believe, crueler. It removes the warmth from a room and waits to see how long you can survive without it. By the 4th morning, my hands were shaking pouring his coffee before my mind had even caught up to why. Then my mother came, on a Thursday, which was never her day, carrying nothing, and she sat at my table and looked at the coat on the peg and told me that a wife who lets the cold in cannot complain when the house freezes. And I understood, in that single sentence, that word had already traveled from my husband to his mother to mine, that the whole district was quietly closing ranks around the wound I had opened. His sister came next, with a quilt square and a story about a friend whose husband tolerated her willfulness, smiling the entire time. The bishop's wife came after that, admired the coat's color, hoped I had made peace with the manner of its acquiring, and left before I had finished pouring her coffee. 3 women in a matter of days, and not one of them said the word coat out loud. That is how warnings travel in a place like the one I came from. Sideways, gently, dressed as concern. It was an old woman named Rebecca who finally said the true thing to me, at a quilting frolic before Christmas, leaning across the frame without lifting her eyes from her stitching. "The coat is not the coat," she said. "They do not hit us. That is not our way. What they do is harder. They take the warmth out of the room and wait to see how long you last in the cold, and most women learn to stop reaching altogether. You are not the first to feel this," Rebecca told me, and you will not be the last, but you are one of the few who has reached. I wore my old, mended coat all that winter. The new one stayed on the peg like something the household had agreed to stop seeing. The bishop paid his visit in January, gentle as a bandage laid over a wound that was still bleeding underneath it, told me the ordnung was a hedge to keep wolves out, and not a cage to keep sheep in, told my husband to be patient with me, the way a man tells a farmer to be patient with a green horse, told me that pride was a slow poison and yielding was the cure, and then he ate his pie and left, and the coat stayed on the peg, and something in me went very still and very quiet, the way a trapped animal goes still once it finally understands the exact shape of the thing holding it. That spring, I lost a child no one but my husband ever knew I was carrying, alone in an upstairs room on an ordinary Tuesday, and I did not cry until 2 weeks later, in the cellar, with my face pressed against the cold shelf where the jars stood, because the cellar was the one room in that house where no one could hear me grieve. I told no one. Something that had been bending in me for 5 years simply stopped bending after that. It did not break, it just went still, and from that stillness I began, very slowly and very quietly, to plan. The decision itself did not arrive like a storm the way I had always imagined it would. It arrived on an October morning while I was hanging my husband's shirts on the line, in the same order I had hung them for 7 years, collars facing south, sleeves overlapping just so, and I understood, watching those 8 white shirts move in the wind, that I would go on hanging them exactly that way until my hands could no longer reach the line, unless I did something about it, and that was the whole of the revelation. No thunderclap, only a season quietly changing behind my eyes. I will save the leaving itself for another video, because it deserves its own telling, but I will tell you I packed 1 bag, took the coffee tin, now holding far more than a coat's worth, took my son, and called a number I had memorized 2 years earlier and never dared write down. I left the new coat hanging on its peg. What came after was its own kind of winter. Letters returned unopened, a father who looked through me in a feed store parking lot as though I were made of glass, sisters who crossed the street rather than pass me on the sidewalk, the particular sound of a phone receiver clicking down that I still hear sometimes in my sleep. It took me years and a small, patient counselor with a beige office above a bakery to find language for what had actually happened to me in that house. She was the one who first told me that what I was describing had a name outside the community I grew up in, that consent extracted by making the cost of refusal unbearable is not consent at all, that emotional withdrawal inside a closed system that controls every door out of your life is not a personality trait but a tool, one of the oldest and most effective tools of control there is, precisely because it leaves no mark the outside world can see. And then she told me the sentence I have carried every day since: the framework was the mistake, not you. I do not tell you any of this because I believe the people in my old life were monsters. My husband was 8 years old the year he was first told his job was to lead a woman, and I was the same age the year I was told mine was to follow one, and neither of us was ever asked whether we wanted the job. My mother had buried children of her own and had no other language for love except warning, and her hands kept moving the whole time she spoke to me because they had been moving for 60 years and did not know how to stop. I do not hate where I came from. It gave me a work ethic and a faith and a mother's bread I still cannot replicate, and a grandfather's cleared fields I still consider the most beautiful land I have ever stood on. The system was the thing that failed us, not the people caught inside it, and some of them knew they were caught and stayed anyway, because the cost of leaving looked heavier than the cost of carrying the stones, and I do not judge a single one of them for that particular arithmetic, because I did the same math myself for years, before I finally came out the other side of it. If any part of this reached you tonight, I would love to hear it in the comments, and if you are new here, I hope you will stay for the next part of the story, because there is a great deal more I have not told you yet, about the bishop, about the cellar, about the morning I finally walked down that lane for good.